So, in case you're wondering why we started today with shofar blowing, is because we're focusing a little bit on shofar today, or not just a little bit, and as Rosh Hashanah is just 3 weeks away, a little bit less than 3 weeks away, we'll talk a little bit about shofar today, because the next couple of weeks we will focus on different Rosh Hashanah related topics and subjects and so on, etc. So that's the story. And during the reason why we just blew shofar, and by the way, in the background, before we get to shofar, in the background you might have seen, I deliberately showed it over there in the background, you might have seen the new Meadow Park, Meadow Playground, which actually will be expanded, and a big thank you to both the Pollack and the Meisner families for sponsoring that playground here at the synagogue in memory, or at Chabad in memory of Meadow. May her soul continue to rise and be blessed, etc. And as we always also start with a bracha, we're going to say a bracha, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyah bidvaro. Hope you answered Amen. And let's begin on this wonderful day, starting a new week. And again, we're getting closer to Rosh Hashanah, so let's talk about shofar. And I also said we'll talk about brisket. So we will. Yesterday Shabbat, we read in the Torah, this is just by way of somewhat introduction, and I view this class, I know people sometimes tell me get straight to the point, but I view this class not just as a class, but as an opportunity to schmooze and discuss with our good friends here on Facebook. And I encourage you that if you have questions, please post them, and hopefully I'll get to see it and I'll try to address. So yesterday we read in the parasha, Ki teitzei la milchama al ovecha, if you go out to war upon your enemies. And the Torah goes on to list some of the laws of the war and how Jews should conduct war. I mean, some over here in the parsha, more in the parsha Shoftim, and in other parshiot, but here the Torah uses the expression Ki teitzei la milchama, you'll go out to do battle. And since we're focusing a little bit on kaballah and Chassidus tells us, of course, something that we know, that Ki teitzei la milchama doesn't only mean a physical battle, but it means also the spiritual battle. And life is about battles, we know that. Life is about battles. Chassidus tells us, Kabbalah tells us that we have the choice to have physical battles versus spiritual battles, and the spiritual battles that we have and that we engage in, if we do so properly, can draw down the blessing from above that we should avoid the physical battles. Let me explain. And I also want to explain this as a way of taking the opportunity to mention that this coming week is my father of blessed memory's Yortzeit. Yortzeit meaning commemorating the day of and honoring the day of his passing, which was on the 15th of El, which this year comes out on a Friday or Thursday night Friday. And so to highlight the point that I just made, or to explain the point I just made, I want to contrast, battle versus battle. My father of blessed memory, His name was Reb Yosef Aryeh ben Avram Simcha, who I'm named after. So his name was Reb Yosef Aryeh ben Avram Simcha HaKohen, the Kohen. So if you say a little l'chaim this week, please have him in mind, as it is customary that we, for the aliyat haneshama, for the elevation of the soul. And my father was an Auschwitz survivor. He went through that hell of Auschwitz. And the story that I've been told, and I haven't heard from him directly because I was a very, very young child when he passed away, unfortunately. So I have only one memory of him, a personal memory, which I will share. I actually, when I started this class, I wasn't planning to do this, but again, as we say, we're amongst friends here when we're schmoozing, and I shared this yesterday Shabbat in the synagogue. So I'm going to share this because I think it has a very important message, both on a human and on a Jewish level. My father was in Auschwitz. The story in that I have been told from my perhaps my mother or maybe my uncle, is that when he was online, the infamous line with Mengele, the doctor of death, may his name be erased, that he that the doctor looked at him, Dr. Mengele looked at him and said, in German, he said, "Du bist zu schön, you're too handsome," and even though he was 14 years old at the time, and I think you had to be 15 or 16 to make it through the age to be sent to labor versus to be sent to the crematorium, where they burnt you. This is what the angel of death, God decided. Every family has its miracle. God decided that he should send them to the right rather than to the left, and as a result, he lived through the hell of Auschwitz, and then got married, and has many, many, many great-grandchildren today. So that's a story that is sort of told in the family of how my father survived his first round as he went into Auschwitz. Incidentally, only his brother and his brother Abchona, survived, and they were a family, I believe, of 7 siblings, parents, and many first cousins. And they all lived in a city called Chust or Chist, in a beautiful courtyard together. Like many of the cousins all lived together in like one large courtyard with homes facing sort of to the courtyard. And they were all murdered by the Nazis. And the only one that survived from the entire family, the only people that survived from the immediate family was my dad and his older brother. and the other 5 siblings, parents, again, and most first cousins, all were murdered. And just to mention, since I'm talking about my dad, I'll just briefly mention about my uncle, is that my uncle managed to smuggle in a pair of tefillin into Auschwitz, which, if caught, it wouldn't take much for a German guard to put a bullet through his head. And every single day while he was in Auschwitz, he put on the tefillin. And every single time he decided to put on the tefillin, he risked his life. Because if he's caught, it's the end. And he only had time, if I recall, my cousin, his son told me, he only had time to say the Shema, the first verse of the Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He, while doing labor, whatever it was, he quickly put on the tefillin. He said, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. He took it off. And that was his daily tefillin. He did not miss a day of putting on tefillin. This is my uncle of blessed memory. So these were remarkable, amazing men. And this was their battle. Kiteitzei la milchama, the portion that we read last week. This was their battle. This was their war. Life does not just go smoothly. In Yiddish, there's a saying, Alts ba'einem and nishdo ba'keinem. All by one, it doesn't exist by anyone. Life has its battles. And Hasidus and Kabbalah tells us that the more we invest in spiritual battles, meaning self-improvement, going out of our comfort zone to help somebody else, the more we invest in those battles, we draw down blessing that we shouldn't have the more difficult battles. Talking about Auschwitz, which is obviously the extreme, but life has its battles, and we all know that, and we've all have friends or ourselves or so on that go through sometimes very difficult battles. Comes Kabbalah and Hasidus tells us invest in spiritual battles, invest in an effort. You don't study Torah every day because it's out of your comfort zone. Kiteitze, go out to battle. It doesn't just say kiti lachim, have war, but kiteitze lamachama, go out to do battle. In other words, go out of your comfort zone, go out of your habits, go out of even what your so-called upbringing limits you, and that's your battle. That's your spiritual battle, but invest it in a positive way, and that will draw down blessing that you shouldn't have to have the more difficult, challenging, and painful battles. So that's by way of introduction, and I also want to, since I mentioned that I'm going to say this, so I will say this again in honor of my father, L'chaim, to his soul, Rabbi Yosef Aya ben Avram Simcha. So my dad, again, passed away when I was really young. And he was also sick with lung cancer for quite a while. I think like for a year or something like that, maybe a year and a half, for quite a while. Which, as a side point, incidentally, we talk about 6 million that died. Who knows whether his lung cancer was a result of him being in the camps too? Because as we know, cancer could take quite a number of years for it to start affecting the body, and so on. So I wonder if that's a statistic that's ever been considered of how many Holocaust survivors, died or had diseases and so on. Unfortunately, but that's the sad part of things. But let's look a little bit more, even though it's somewhat a sad story. But my objective is to bring out the positive, as that's what we always need to do. So I only have one memory of my dad, because I was about 3 years old when he became sick. And the only memory is the following, is that one time, after being in the hospital with treatment for quite a while, he came home, was back in the hospital. So one of the times that he came from the hospital, I must have been 4 years old at the time, maybe 3 or 4. He came home, and I remember I was in the bedroom, my parents' bedroom, and I asked him if he could pick me up. A child, I asked my dad to pick me up. And I remember my mother saying, he can't pick you up, and it's too schwach in Yiddish. We spoke Yiddish. He said he'd give a thumbs up for Yiddish. For all those who understand a bissel Yiddish, give us a thumbs up. What a beautiful, rich language. So I asked my dad to pick me up. My mom said that it's too schwach, he's too weak. And my dad nevertheless made the effort. He bent down and he picked me up. And that is the only personal memory that I have of my father. So what's the lesson? What's the lesson from that? What's the positive, uplifting lesson? So first, on a human level. On a human level is, as a parent, you never know which moment of quality, of importance, that you're going to spend with your child, that your child will remember forever. You never know. And therefore live and cherish and invest in every single meaningful moment that you can with your children. That's a simple, clear, obvious lesson. I will also take it to a little bit, more to the spiritual side, which is, from all the memories that I could have had, the memory is of a father lifting up his child. And it reminds me of a story. There's a known story that's been told, maybe not known to the audience, but it's known in the sort of the Chabad world, because it's been told, and I heard it directly from the individual, a very prominent rabbi who is already in heaven as well, as we say in Yiddish, as al hoben al lichtike Gan Eden. So he mentioned the following story. His name is Rabbi Yossel Weingarten, who was a very prominent individual in the Chabad world, without getting into all the details. And he related the following story. He related that at one point, he was a shadar. He was like a messenger. He was also a fundraiser for the main Chabad yeshiva in Crown Heights. And as such, he would travel and develop sort of connections with people throughout the world. And at one point, he received a request from someone who had a major emergency, and the person asked him if he could please hand in a request for a bracha and for prayer, for blessing and prayer, to the Rebbe, to Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the holy and saintly leader of our time, so that tzaddik, when a righteous person prays for a blessing and for your well-being, God listens. So, as the Talmud says, so the Rebbe would receive and still receives at the Ohel, at his resting place, thousands and thousands of requests for blessing and prayer. So Rabbi Weingarten received a blessing from one of his acquaintances, one of his people that he, I guess, had a relationship with, and a request for some sort of medical emergency. And it was sort of later at night, and the usual channels is you would go to the Rebbe's secretary and they would hand in the request. But it appears that this was already later at night. So Rabbi Weingarten decided to stick the note into the Rebbe's room, to the Rebbe's office, to stick the note between the doors, because it was an emergency, and I guess he didn't feel comfortable knocking on the Rebbe's door, which was really not something done, but he figured that when the Rebbe opens the door, the Rebbe will see the request, and he will have done his in terms of handing in the request. The Rebbe opens the door, the note falls to the floor, and the Rebbe bends down, picks it up, reads the note, and so on. Rabbi Weingarten, Rabbi Yossel, felt terrible that he caused the Rebbe to have to bend down. So he wrote a letter of an apology to the Rebbe. He wrote a letter of apology saying, I apologize that I caused the Rebbe to bend down. So the Rebbe responded the following. The Rebbe responded in Hebrew. I'll say the words in Hebrew as I best remember, then I'll translate, explain. Aloizeu kol inyoni. This is my entire being, my entire thing, who I am, is lehorim, is to lift up a fellow Jew, especially that which others have overseen and overlooked. So there's no need to apologize. That's the gist of it. In other words, you're apologizing that I had to bend down to lift a fallen Jew, a Jew that was in distress. That's what it's all about. That's what I'm all about, to lift up a Jew that needs help and find a way to help them, to lift them up. And I see this story as a message also in my personal memory, that the one memory, it could have been so many memories, it could have been my father, I don't know, playing ball together. It could have been a memory of swimming in the pool. But the one memory that I have of my dad is my dad bending down and lifting up a Jewish child, and the symbolism in that. And the message that I would like to share here in a way of honoring my father is that we should take that message, that when we see a fellow Jew, when we see a fellow human being, that if we should always find a way to lift them up. And there are many ways to do that. It could be lifting them up with a smile, with a kind word, with a helping hand, with financial help if necessary, with food if necessary, with just a positive comment. You know, there's so many ways that one could do that, of lifting up a fellow human being. So that's in honor of my dad. I wanted to share that. His yahrzeit is coming up this week, God willing, and hopefully this story will inspire even one more act of lifting up someone else, and it's already a benefit for his neshama, for his soul. Now, talking about the shofar, and even connecting it to what we just the story that I just mentioned, like every Jewish mitzvah and topic, there's so much that can be shared. So much. But as I stress all the time, as we're approaching Rosh Hashanah, you know, it's you can approach it on a very superficial way. What's going to be on the menu? Is the brisket going to be done well? Will we sit around the table and just schmooze, which you could do at any time and all times? Or will we make it a meaningful Rosh Hashanah? And to make it a meaningful Rosh Hashanah, sorry for that brief interruption. To make it a meaningful Rosh Hashanah, you have to learn and study what Torah and Judaism says. Allow it to sink in, so it affects your passion and your emotions and your actions. So therefore, we are here to learn a little bit about shofar. So let's talk about shofar, which is the one mitzvah. The one biblical mitzvah about Rosh Hashanah, the unique biblical mitzvah, is of course the blowing of the shofar. Besides it being a holiday, there's a mitzvah to blow shofar. Now, why do we blow shofar? It seems kind of outdated. And what's the importance of it? What's the symbolism? So first and foremost, as Maimonides says, that we blow shofar like any other mitzvahs because God told us so, and it's a choik. The Rambam says, Maimonides says it's a choik. It's in the category of mitzvahs which are a statute, which means that we do so because Hashem said so, and azoi idus, that's the way it is. Every single mitzvah has that common denominator. We do it, God said, we do it. Like a child listens to his dad. Nevertheless, the Rambam says that the mitzvah of shofar is to the call of the shofar, that piercing sound that the shofar has, that natural piercing sound that the shofar has, is a way of arousing our heart to do tshuva, to repent. Let me explain that a little bit more, as it is discussed in Kabbalah. And again, there is much we could discuss on the mitzvah of shofar. But one of the explanations and the mashalim, one of the analogies or examples or parables given by the holy Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, is the following. And this is where we talk about the shofar, and it relates to sort of the relationship. I spoke about a story of my father, a child, that special bond. So the Baal Shem Tov relates the following parable to highlight what the shofar is all about. He says the following. Very often in the Medrash we find when they talks about God and the Jewish people, it talks about a king and a prince, a king and his child. So here we had a king, and he had a son, he had a child, beautiful prince, and the king, of course, loved him with all his heart. And because the king loved him with all his heart, the king saw as the prince was growing up in this sheltered environment, I was in Publix the other day, and I saw a headline. And the headline was on one of the tabloids. The headline was an article on how the filthy rich live. Why is it important to know how the filthy rich live? Weiß ich nicht. It's important to make our lives meaningful. Why do I need to know how the filthy rich live? But that was the headline as I'm standing in line there to pay for whatever I was shopping. So the king saw that his son, the prince, was growing up in a sheltered environment. And he wanted his child to develop his talents. And he wanted to send him into the real world, as we call it. And he wanted to send him into a world where he's not going to be given special treatment because he's the prince. And this is how the father, the king, felt that he will truly develop into a real mensch. Right? Thumbs up if you know what mensch means. The other day someone asked me, what does it mean to be a mensch? If you have a moment and you want to write a comment to define mensch, you're welcome to do so. So what did the king do? The king went ahead and he sent his son, the prince, off to a very far distant land where nobody really knew. It was under the king's jurisdiction, I guess, but nobody really knew about the king. It was far, not just geographically, it was just far in terms of being far from the capital and the whole lifestyle of the king. It was just one of these far off distant lands that that had its own sort of culture and so on. He sends his prince there, and he says to the prince, he gives him whatever he needs initially to survive, and then he says to him, "You're on your own, kid. Do what you got to do to survive." That's the story. That's what I have. That's what you're gonna have to do, like it or not. Okay. So he, in the beginning, he's the prince. He acts in a very prince-like manner, and all is fine and good. But with time, I mean, this was a place, I guess, of farmers or not the highest class individuals as it relates to where he grew up in the palace. And with time, as time passed, he started to learn from the ways of the people around. And he started to decline in his moral behavior as well, until he sort of totally abandoned the palace-like lifestyle. And this went on for a while, to the extent that he even learned the new language. I guess they spoke a different language there, and he forgot the language of his homeland. He forgot Yiddish. Vergessen sein Yiddish. He forgot to speak his Mamalushen, his mother tongue language. And then one day it hits him. It hits him on the distant and low lifestyle that he has started to live, or that he's living, and he developed this tremendous yearning for his father, for his mother, for his birthplace, of what his essence and core is really all about. And he made the resolve that, be it whatever it might take, he is heading back to the palace. He's heading back to the capital. And he starts his journey. It's a difficult journey, but he's determined. And to make a long story short, he gets to the capital, and he starts telling everybody that he's the prince. And he's in tzeris and akleda because he didn't really work. He was lazing around. He's in torn clothing and rags. And he's telling the people in the capital, and he's telling them that he is the prince. And they look at him like he is meshuggah, like he's nuts. Who is this guy, this shlemazel, this poor whatever, nobody going around saying that he's a beggar? Going around saying that he's the prince. And everybody sort of just pushes him away, and malacht from them, they're laughing from him, but he's determined, and he keeps on going, and he comes to the palace. And the guards are there, and he starts trying to tell them, because he doesn't even speak the language. He tries to tell them in some way communicate them that he is the child of the king. And again, they're also laughing, and they're pushing him away, and he is just sitting there. And one day, as he's sitting there, the gates open, and the king comes out with his wonderful, beautiful chariot to take a stroll, to get some fresh air throughout the city, whatever it might be. And he sees his father. But he doesn't even know the language. He forgot the language. But he has such a yearning from the depth of his heart to his dad that he only shouts out with a pure voice. And the king hears the voice. And the voice penetrates the king's heart, and he recognizes that this was his son. He jumps off the wagon. He runs towards his child, and they embrace each other, tears, and with great love. This is the story or parable that the Baal Shem Tov says. The Baal Shem Tov says the following. Rosh Hashanah is a new year. Rosh Hashanah is a time where we go ahead and we recognize that it's time to go back to our essence, to our core, to our deep soul. Now, some of us, more than others, but most of us in one way or another have drifted. And some of us have even forgotten how to communicate the language of our Father. We don't perhaps know how to read Hebrew, Or on a spiritual level, it means we don't know how to communicate, that even though we even say the prayers every single day perhaps, but it's without any life. It's not the communication that we communicate with the king. We have forgotten how to communicate. Each on his level. The call of the shofar is that call of the child that calls out to his dad or her dad from the core of their heart, of our Jewish heart. We call out and we say, we are yours. We are deeply connected, regardless of where and how we have behaved throughout the year. We want to come closer. We recognize that in our essence, we are one. And it is that call that sort of breaks all the barriers. Even the language would not have gotten the prince to the king. Perhaps he would have said words, it would just not have even been understood. It was the pure call, which represents that inner drive of the heart that reached the king, that reached our dad. And that is part of what the beautiful sound of the shofar represents. And I want to finish with one more story. One more story in terms of appreciating what the shofar is all about. And maybe we'll still talk about it more, in future classes as we get ready for Rosh Hashanah. There's another very beautiful story told about two brothers. And these two brothers, we'll call them Moshe and Yankel. Okay, Moshe and Yankel. Moshe and Yankel got married. They had kinderlach. And something happened that Moshe did that really, really offended Yankel. You ever watched Avalon? I don't know if you ever watched Avalon, the movie. You cut the taiki, you didn't wait for me. And they got angry with each other forever. So Moshe did something that offended Yankel, and Yankel was so hurt and offended and insulted that he cut off all communications with his brother. His brother Moshe asked for forgiveness. His brother Moshe sent letters and asked for forgiveness. Said, Gurnish geholfen, nothing helped. Yankel, you don't exist. Moshe, you don't exist. Years go by, and finally Moshe is marrying off his first child. And he says to himself, I'm going to marry off my first child, and my own brother Yankel will not be at the wedding. How could I not have my own Yankel at the wedding? So he sends him an invitation, even though they didn't communicate in a long time, and he begs him. He begs him to come to his daughter's wedding, and no response. No response. So this is what happens. On the day of the wedding, Moshe, who really wants his brother to be there, it's a big simcha, and he hires the best musicians, and he hires the most sought after violinist. That when he played, it was like playing right on your heart. And as the evening comes along and they're starting to get ready for the chasana and the wedding begins, he tells the violinist, I want you to go to my brother Yankel's home. It's already the night of the wedding, and Yankel decides, instead of agonizing over his brother's child's wedding, that he's going to get into bed. Okay? But as he's laying there in bed, he all of a sudden hears this beautiful, beautiful music playing outside his window. He cannot ignore it. And then the music starts to get a little bit lower, because the violinist is walking away from his house, and he is what's the word I'm looking for? He's totally captivated. He's totally hypnotized by the music, and he can't. And he starts to follow the music, and the violinist is moving, and Yankel is following the violinist until the violinist goes into the wedding hall, and Yankel goes into the wedding hall following the violinist, and he sees his brother, and he sees the joy, and he breaks down, and they hug, and they cry, and they laugh, and they dance. But there's one problem. What's the problem? You guessed it. The problem is that Yankel is still in his pajamas. And this story is told as a counter to the first story I told you. On the one hand, that pure voice represents the call of our inner heart, that regardless of our level of Jewish observance, regardless of our level of Jewish knowledge, the call of a child from his inner heart or her inner heart penetrates all that, and the connection is there. On the other hand, the second story tells us if you're already going to come to the wedding, because that inner call of the shofar is analogous to the violin that calls us, and we all eventually end up showing up at the wedding. Why do you have to come in pajamas? Come dressed like a mensch. How do you dress like a mensch? You prepare for Rosh Hashanah. You daven a little bit before. You learn a little bit before. You review your ways and your shortcomings and areas where you could improve. That's how you put on a beautiful suit. In Kabbalah and Hasidus, good deeds are compared to a garment. The more good deeds we do, the more beautiful our garments are. So if we're already going to come to the wedding, we're going to come Rosh Hashanah because the violin, the shofar, is going to attract us. Let's come not in pajamas. So that's our little short class for today. A little bit about the meaning of the shofar. And I said I'm going to talk about brisket. So I want to talk about brisket both in actual brisket, and I want to talk about brisket on a spiritual level. Why is it that it's going to become such a big to-do to eat brisket? And I want to tell you like this. I grew up in a religious home. Not because I'm better than anybody, but that's where God decided to send my soul down into a home that and my parents were religious. Let me see what this is. Hold on. I don't know who this is, but I'm going to open it up. So God decided to send me into a home. That was the mission of my soul, that I should be born into a home where both my parents were religious. But all Jews, as I just said, that when it talks about the inner essence of a Jewish soul, we're all the same. I never grew up that Rosh Hashanah was a time for brisket. I grew up that Rosh Hashanah was a time for very, very serious connection and coronating God as our King, which, by the way, very, very important to remember that one of the reasons that it's discussed and very much in Kabbalah that we blow shofar is that marks the time that we coronate God as our King. Maybe we'll talk about that more in a future class, just because of the limitation of time. So I never grew up with brisket, but I want to say that the aspect in general that a Jewish holiday, especially Rosh Hashanah, which is it's the time when we begin the 10 days of judgment, and it's a very serious time, but yet we go ahead and we have a festive meal, is because the Medrash says, and again, continuing with the theme that we just spoke, that because we are dealing with our Father in heaven, we are so confident that we will be blessed with a new year, that we have a festive meal. Usually you go to a judgment. If you're called to court, and because if someone is called to court under the threat of a death penalty, you're going to sit down and have a festive meal, you're not going to be able to eat. But we eat, we have brisket, whatever it might be, but we eat and we have a festive meal because our relationship of love and connection to God is such that we are 100% confident that He will bless every single one of us with a fantastic, beautiful new year. So that's one of the reasons we have a festive meal. And if brisket is what it does, it's Zolzayim brisket. And you should have a blessed brisket. You should have a brisket like never before. But one thing, remember, that it's not, if your Rosh Hashanah is all about, and I'm sure it isn't, but sometimes we can get a little carried away. And if your whole Rosh Hashanah begins and ends with brisket, that's not what Rosh Hashanah is all about. This year also, at Chabad, and Chabad together with my nephew, Rabbi Yanki Denberg, Chabad Southwest, we will be giving away hundreds and hundreds of Rosh Hashanah kits or boxes, and in that box we will be having Shabbat candles. We'll be having grape juice. We'll be having a beautiful JLI booklet that has the meaning of the holidays and some of the basic prayers. And inside there, the key to a Jew's soul is through his stomach, as the saying goes. So inside there, we will also have some food, honey cake. We will be having, God willing, we plan on it, we'll be having a couple of slices of brisket for the family. So, and we would like to reach every single Jew in Coral Springs. And what we would also like is that every single Jew should not only take for themselves, but to take for a fellow Jew in Coral Springs. So you do a mitzvah and pass on this package that will be a combination of soul and body. Beautiful material for Rosh Hashanah, and at the same time, some delicious food. So we would like to really reach every single Jew in Coral Springs for Rosh Hashanah with this Rosh Hashanah packet or this Rosh Hashanah box. So please let me know. In order to get the box, we want you to register. And if you have a friend, 2 friends, 3 friends, 4 friends, Jewish friends here in Coral Springs, please register or send me an email or send me even a WhatsApp, and we will make sure that we prepare a package for you. I will also add that if you need a prayer book, a full prayer book, because for whatever reason you're not comfortable coming to synagogue and to the other services that we will be having around town, we will be having outdoor services throughout the city, hosted by one service will be at the library. This is besides the service here at Chabad, including outdoor services that we will be having, just a shofar service here at Chabad. If you go to our website, you'll be able to see the specific schedule. We will be also having shofar services throughout the city. One at the public library outside, hosted by the mayor. Big thank you to Mayor Scott Brook. We will be having a young Jewish professional group at Meadows Park by Betty Stradling, hosted by Hunter Pollack. I mean, everybody's welcome, but it's being hosted by the YJP, by Young Jewish Professional group that we have, as well as on the walk, which will be hosted by Deputy Chief Backer and Rabbi Moshe Rabin. So, and as well as by the Chabad Hebrew School, which is run by Chabad Southwest by Rabbi Yankee Chana Denberg. The Hebrew School will be hosting the other outdoor shofar blowing. All this happens 5 p.m. Sunday, September 20th. They will be hosting as well the Hebrew School. Everybody is welcome. Everybody is welcome to go hear the shofar, but it's hosted by the Hebrew School. We will also, I believe that will take place, I think, at Cypress Park. I will look at the website. Slipped my mind whether it's at Mullins Park or Cypress Park. And as well as over here at Chabad at 5 o'clock, there will be a blowing where everybody's welcome, hosted by our Israeli group, followed by Tashlach. As well as 7 o'clock, there will be an outdoor, followed by Tashlach. So that's a lot of information. Go to our website, you could get it. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we will all be blessed with a beautiful, good, sweet new year. This is all part of that preparation. You're welcome to send me questions, suggestions for future classes. Please share these words of Torah with as many as you can, so that we spread positivity, that we all increase our spiritual and holy footprint. So let's do so. Everybody have a fantastic week. Thank you for joining us.